God, thank you for this morning. Thank you that we get to come together. God, I pray that as we go through your word this morning, God, I pray that you speak to the places in our hearts and our minds that need to hear from you. God, we also just ask that anything of the enemy that would be trying to distract us this morning, that might be trying to turn our attention elsewhere, or God, we just pray against that, and we ask that your presence and your voice just speak loudly this morning. In your name, amen. Awesome. Well, for those of you who may not know me, my name is Jordan. I'm the lead pastor here, and we've been going through a series on in Jeremiah, and we're on Nehemiah 4. Not Jeremiah, Nehemiah. There's so many Mayas. Sorry, Jeremiah. Jeremiah spoke last week, and I have to say thank you. So that's where, we might go through Jeremiah another time, but not through your life publicly up here. We're in Nehemiah 4. So if you want to turn there, I'm reading out the ESV. And what we're doing today, we're not going to go through it literally verse by verse, but we'll be walking through the story. So I encourage you to read along with me as we go through it. But I wanted to share with you a bit of a grievance that I have with Regina this morning as we get into it. At Costco, they have all those pumpkin pies, right? And before Thanksgiving, we were shopping, and they had a table that was I don't know, maybe I'm exaggerating, but maybe 30 feet long. And it was stacked about my height with pumpkin pie, and then I went back the other day, and it was gone. And so the Thanksgiving season has really passed, and I've become bitter now because now I can't get that. But it was just it was a reminder of, kind of the joy of Thanksgiving. It's a moment, and it's a good thing to celebrate and to reminisce with the family of things past. And this morning, as I was reading it, it kind of brought back a part of my childhood. And whenever I go to Thanksgiving dinner, you probably do too, it's mostly filled up with you talking about stories from your siblings and the amazing and terrible things you did to one another, and the weird adventures you got into. And as I was reading this chapter, in the first two verses, I immediately was brought back to a memory of Looney Tunes. And I know it's a little weird, but in the first couple verses, we meet our antagonists of the story, Sanballat and Tobiah. And like I said before, my Persian is terrible, and my mastery of ancient tongues is awful, so I apologize. But these two are, in the story of Nehemiah, these two are the main antagonists, the main villains of the story, and they're trying to stop Nehemiah's work on the wall. And one of the main reasons why they're trying to do that is that Sanballat is the leading official of the province of Samaria. And he sees Nehemiah's being sent to Judah to rebuild the wall as a challenge to his power politically. And he wants all the favor, and he wants all the power. And the reason why I thought of Looney Tunes when I read this is that, do you remember the characters Spike and Chester? They're the two dogs in the construction yard. They're kind of 30s gangsters, right? There's a big bulldog. His name is Spike. He's really strong, and Chester's like a little lap dog that runs in circles around him, yapping of how awesome he is, right? And when I was reading the first two verses, I thought of them because it says in verse. I'll just read it, and maybe you can figure it out. When Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. And he said in the presence of the brothers and of the army of Samaria, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish it in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and the burned ones?" Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him and said, "Yes, what are they building? If a fox goes up there, he will break it down with their stone." So this is where I got the image, because Sanballat being the strong, powerful leader, and then his kind of lackey, so to speak, "Yeah, you're right, man, they suck," right? So I had this kind of fun image of them, and maybe it's not great because it kind of takes them away from it, but it takes away from maybe the seriousness of their threats. But here we see in the story the beginning of real opposition and the brooding of a plan. Because if you're a bad guy and you're monologuing in front of your army, it's probably not a good thing, right? He's beginning to create dissension, and he's beginning to kind of other these people in an attempt, as we'll see as we go through, to create unrest. And when we get to verse 4, we get into this weird spot because we get the monologue, and then in verse 4, all of a sudden it goes into a prayer. And if you were reading it quickly, you might see that you might be a little confused. Who's praying this, right? Is it the two antagonists or villains praying this? So, but it's actually Nehemiah. So after this we're presented with the problem in this chapter, with the antagonist's desire to disrupt the work. We hear Nehemiah's prayer, and it starts in verse 4, and he says, "Hear, O God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunts on their own heads, and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. Do not cover their guilt, and let not their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders." This is kind of harsh, right? It's maybe on a bad day, you might feel this way towards someone who you would consider your rival, your enemy. But to pray that someone's guilt or sin not be blotted out, and that that their land be ravaged and taken off into exile, is kind of heavy, right? Like, it's not something you be like, oh wow, that's a really good thing I want to emulate, right? And it's a good this prayer is a good reminder for us as we read the Bible that these are real people. Right? These are people who are living in this case, chaos and a bit of destruction and a lot of anger and bitterness that they're working out, because they're living in the ruined city. Right? Their people were taken away, and they're meeting resistance. And it's good for us to appreciate some of the human emotion that goes into this, and it's also good for us to appreciate that not everything written in the Bible is endorsed as behavior that we should copy, right? A good example is David, right? When he saw a woman that he wanted to be with, he arranged for her husband to be murdered, and then he took her. We're not supposed to do that, but it's written down. And in the same way, when we see a prayer like this, it's not license for us when we meet people that we don't like or we have issue with to say, God, I pray that you don't forgive their sins. It may be a normal human emotion for us to have in a moment, but we need to remember that Jesus said something very different. And in Luke 6, he said, "But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you." So when we read this, don't take it as license to give in to the bitterness and anger, but use it as an opportunity to actually empathize with the writer and see like, oh yeah, that is how I would maybe feel in this situation. Right. So now that Nehemiah is expressing his frustration at Sanballat and Tobiah, he continues the story in verse 6. "So we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work." And remember when Jeremiah spoke last week, he talked about all the builders and all the people and how they got all their names there. And this verse is giving us a bit of an update on the progress. Right? The wall is about halfway done, and if you are the enemy who wants to attack them, the best time to attack a wall is when there isn't one. Right? If you want to take over a city, the best time is when it's not defended. So this is Nehemiah kind of letting us know where things are, so we have an idea of the urgency that is actually in here. Right? The enemy is seeing a vulnerable point and says, okay, we got to get our forces figured out. And so that's what verse 6 does for us. We get a sense of urgency in where we're at. And after that, in verse 7, we see that the plan starts coming together. When Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward, and that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry. And they plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. And this is actually quite genius. And I think if we slow down here, I read this a bunch of times, and only last night did I realize kind of the genius in this is that this is a multi-pronged plan of attack. They teamed up with a bunch of other enemies of Jerusalem, but what they also did was they wanted to stop the repairing of the wall physically by fighting, but also to cause confusion. Right? Because if you want to stop a movement, you can't just use physical violence all the time, because it often doesn't work. You create martyrs, you do all these other things to actually help the movement. So what they wanted to do instead, in addition to, is they wanted to cause confusion. They wanted to hurt the morale. They wanted to break down the spirit and the heart of the people. And it is an interesting commentary on how the enemy wants, how our enemies want to attack us. Is that our grand enemy does not just use one avenue of attack, but he'll use multiple. And we see how this attack is carried out in verses 10 and 12 when you see three rumors being described. It was said, in verse 10 it says, "In Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There's too much rubble. By ourselves we will not be able to rebuild the wall." So the first rumor, or the first lie that the enemy is trying to plant in the people of Jerusalem is that it's just too much. Like, look at all the rubble. You guys can't do this. Like, you guys are tired. You traveled all this way. It's, you don't have the strength. So there's no real point in trying. It's too much. It's too hard. The second rumor that they lie that they plant, and maybe this isn't a lie, but it's a threat in verse 11. "And our enemies said, they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work." So there's the threat of physical violence, right? They're like, well, and physical violence is most feared when it's unanticipated, right? If you just said, "I'm going to hit you today at some point," well, you're going to look over your shoulder all the day and say, like, is he actually going to hit me or not? Right? Like, I don't know if you ever want to torture your sibling, that's a good way to do it, right? But there's the unknown anticipation of violence brings a lot of stress and anxiety. And that wears on your mental state. The third one is in verse 12. "And at the time, the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, 'You must return to us.'" And this one's a bit tricky because this one is kind of a response to the first two, but it's also, I think, part of the plan. Is that because of the first two threats, it was dangerous to be in Jerusalem. So the workers who lived around Jerusalem, their families were like, "Hey, I don't want to see you get hurt. It's too dangerous to do the work. Just come and be safe. Like, don't go out and be bold and courageous. Just come back and be safe, right? Because if you do that, you might get hurt. You could be killed. We like you." And this is a really tricky one because it actually pulls on the heartstrings more than the other ones. The other ones kind of pull on your character and a bit of your mental fortitude, but this one is pulling at your heartstrings and saying, "You know what? It's good for you to come home because I care about you." And that can be a really tricky thing, especially if you have a caregiver. I recently watched Tangled with my kids. Have you seen that movie with Rapunzel? Right? The evil mother uses tenderness to coerce and control the main lady, right? So it can be a very powerful form of control. So we have three very powerful attacks on their mental state, and right? It's too much, it's too hard. You don't know when we're going to come kill you, but we're going to, and come home is too dangerous. So this is a lot, right? And if you were living in that city, that's a lot of pressure. But Nehemiah has a response. And in the middle of describing this in verse 9, he says, "And we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night." And this is a great example of how we've already seen Nehemiah. And when I talked about him in chapter 1 and 2, we talked about how he was prepared. Right? He wanted to pray. His first response to the problem that was going on in Jerusalem was he prayed. And he prayed a very bold and courageous prayer. And when given the opportunity, he stepped out in faith to go live it out. And here we see a very small version of the same idea. He prayed, and then he went into action, right? Because his prayer prompted him to action, and he was a smart and capable man, right? And so, and as we go into verse 13, we start to see the details of this resistance. In verse 13, so in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in the open places, I stationed people by their clans with their swords, their spears, and their bows. Right? So the first thing is that, okay, people need to be organized and they need to be armed. Right? In the threat of the unknown and all of this, we need to make people see that there's resistance. So we're going to arm people, we're going to set them in the most vulnerable parts so that not only does the enemy know that there's resistance, but now our people know that we're not taking this lying down. Right? It does two things, right? It bolsters your own confidence. You know, have you ever walked through the woods and you grabbed a big stick and you're like, yeah, this feels good, right? Maybe that's just a guy thing. I don't know. But sometimes that happens, right? Or when I go to if you ever go hunting or walking in the woods with a gun, sometimes people call it feels good. You feel safe, right? I mean, sometimes big wolf tracks are a little more intimidating, but it feels good and it feels safe when you know people around you can protect you. Right? So that was the first thing. They needed that affirmation. In verse 14 is the second thing. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. And this is the more important thing is that this pointed people to their true strength. Right? Having weapons and having things around to bolster your confidence is good, right? But it doesn't address the issue on the inside. Because one of the biggest issues when an army is fighting is that their nerves break and they run away. So the second part actually deals with that, with our nerves, is that Nehemiah is getting at the core of where their strength comes from. And he's doing it in a very clever way. He says, remember the Lord who is great and awesome. And that description of God as great and awesome is a direct callback to Moses speaking in Deuteronomy. When Moses is encouraging the people to go into the land and take the land from these scary giants and all these people, he says, you shall not be in dread of them, for the Lord your God is in your midst, a great and awesome God. And then later, when he's encouraging them in Deuteronomy, he says, for the Lord your God is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God who is not partial, takes no bribe, and executes justice for the fatherless and the widow, and loves a sojourner, giving him food and clothing. So Nehemiah is using familiar language in times of crisis where people needed to be rallied together, and he's using this historic call to remind people of the character of God and his ability. But that's not all, because in addition to, he encourages them by saying, your community is here, right? Don't fight for yourself. Fight for the person beside you, your brother, your family. And being a big military history fan, there's a lot of shows that go through this. When soldiers are in the midst of fighting, they don't really care about their orders as much. They care about the person beside them more. Because in those moments, that's all that really matters. After you go through the intense moment, then you can worry about other things. And Nehemiah is calling on this sense of camaraderie, this sense of community, by saying, in these tense moments, your motivation is not for yourself, but it is for others. So it's a calling out of the self-focus, right, that the enemy is trying to put inside of them. Because if you noticed, all the enemy's lies are, you're not strong enough, you don't know when I'm going to kill you, and it's too dangerous for you. Right? Those are all, and they all attack your inward perception of yourself. It calls into question, like, am I good enough? Am I brave enough to stay here? Right? And this one says, well, look outside of yourself to the people around you. And the work continues. And as they continue to work, they grow in vigilance. And this is another part of Nehemiah's plan, is that in verse 15, when our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. From that day on, half my servants worked on construction, and half held the spears, the bows, and shields and coats of mail. And all the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah, who were building the wall. And those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each laborer labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon in the other. And each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he built. This is the level of vigilance, right? So they passed the initial test, stress test, right? They stopped the enemy's threats. They countered them, but now they have to move forward. And learning the lessons of that, they decided, you know what? We have to be flexible and we have to be vigilant. We have to be willing to build at one moment, to fight at another. Right? And this very much reminded me of 1 Peter 3:15. You've probably have heard this one before. It says, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks to give you the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." Right? So there's this sense of readiness, the sense of vigilance, the sense of flexibility that I think is not only just admirable then, but very admirable and applicable now. And at the very end, in verse 21 to 23, we see this vigilance lived out again. That in verse 23 it says, "So neither I nor my brothers, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took our clothes off. Each kept his weapon at his right hand." So at nighttime when they rested, they were ready. And these are the leaders. These aren't the workers now, but the leaders are willing to say, you know what? I'm not just going to sit back here and, eat my grapes lounging on a chair, but I'm going to be ready to fight in the same way. And this story in chapter 4 is actually is a really brilliant way of looking at how to respond to the enemy. So as I was, thinking over the themes and everything, there's kind of three main themes that came out. The first one is a smart enemy attacks on different fronts. Sanballat and Tobiah threaten physical violence and psychological pressure. Okay? And today, our enemy does the exact same thing. Right? How many of you have ever done any kind of work with addiction counseling, or ever had done like addiction, had to work through an addiction before? Right? Have you ever heard of something called HALT? Does anyone know what that means? It's an acronym. It means hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. And those, if you ever have an addiction, those are like 4 key physical triggers to when you might go seek the thing that you are addicted to. And the reason why I thought of it like this is that our enemy wants to distract us from all the good things that God has for us. And sometimes the best way to do that is through our physical body, right? And if you've ever noticed that, the word hangry, right? When we don't take care of our body, right? It's an opportunity for the enemy to come and try and manipulate us. In the same way that if we don't take care of our spiritual life, the enemy will use that to attack us. And sometimes it's not any fault of our own, but the enemy uses our body and our mind as battlegrounds. But there's hope, because that's not the end of everything. Because the second theme that I saw through here was true inspiration is found in God. And Nehemiah, when he said, "Do not be afraid, remember the Lord who is great and awesome," that had a lot of historical significance for those people. And I wanted to give us our own kind of version of that. So I'm going to read some scripture here that builds, hopefully will build the idea of God's character and the confidence you can have in him. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you. God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven, on earth, invisible and visible, whether thrones, dominions, rulers, or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, and in that everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. So it is in Christ, it is Christ within us that gives us strength and new life, and makes us able to abide in love, and provides for us the will to fight when we are exhausted. So remember the Lord, how great and awesome he is, and that he came to die on a cross to be with us. And the third theme is that in life you need to be equipped. Like I mentioned earlier, it's nice to hold, to feel like you can hold your own. And Paul repeats a similar theme in Ephesians. He says, finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Sounds kind of familiar to Nehemiah, right? But what he also does is he goes on to say in Ephesians, he talks about how we can be armed and equipped. But he also says it very differently, because Nehemiah fought against an enemy that was trying to attack him physically, but Paul says it differently. He says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." So just like how we saw in Nehemiah, how we can't pray the same way he did. We can't fight the same way he did. We have to fight differently. And we have to be armed differently. And thankfully, Paul gives us what that looks like as well. This is verse 13 of chapter 6 of Ephesians. "Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Stand therefore, having fashioned on the belt of truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace. In all circumstances, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one. And take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying at all times in the Spirit with all prayer and supplication. To that end, keep alert with all perseverance." So we're supposed to now arm ourselves in a different way, and it's done through the indwelling of Christ. And that's part of our inheritance as the work of the cross, is to arm ourselves with these tools. See, Nehemiah took the initiative and went after the means of protection and security. And Paul has laid out for us a new armory and a new armorer to chase. So be diligent in your pursuit of the person who gives it. Well, this morning we have an opportunity after where we're going to pray together. And if you feel like you need to be strengthened, if you feel that maybe you feel like the enemy is trying to push in on many sides, come for prayer, both after the service and then stick around as we pray together later. I want to share with you out of Colossians 1:11, a prayer that Paul had for the church. May you be strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, for all endurance and patience with joy, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. So be reminded and stand in the strength that Christ has given us. Go in peace this week.